So I was saying that I think we're small enough of a group that we can actually go around and do a little bit of intros. I know we have some people online, and I want to be respectful of that, but that will make us get to know who is in the room. So I'm going to pass the mic, and I'm going to introduce myself last and the speakers last. But if you can pass the mic quickly around, that would be great.
Aaron Schneider. I'm a professor here at the University of Denver at the Korbel School, and I'm the director of the Institute for Comparative and Regional Studies and the Latin America Center.
My name is Jesus, and I'm a Cuban Haitian immigrant that has been in the country for a year, 3 years now, and I've been working with Cuban Haitian population for over a year now.
Hi, my name is Miguel, and I'm actually a teacher, and my field of studies is economics. And then I'm Mexican, by the way, too, Latino, and I'm very excited about this presentation.
Hola, my name is Elena Hernandez. I studied finance and economics. I am from Puerto Rico, but my blood is Cuban. My parents are Cuban. I've been in the US since 2001, and I'm very excited to hear about the conversation with my friend Verónica Figoli.
Hi, my name is Brian Murray. I'm actually a student here over at the university program here, and my focus is on information and cybersecurity. And I'm really interested in hearing about the immigration systems and getting some more input about what's going on down in Central and South America. Thank you.
My name is Sophia Delota. I'm a first-year undergraduate student here at the University of Denver studying international studies and leadership, and I'm here because I would like to learn more as well.
Hi, my name is Anna Hickson. I'm also an undergraduate student, first year at Korbel. I study international studies and economics, and a lot of my friends are Venezuelan, so I'm definitely interested in hearing more.
Hi, my name's Amanda. I'm a first-year Korbel student in the graduate program, Sustainability. I'm also on our communications team here, so I'll be taking some photos today.
Hi, my name is Jessie Columbai. I'm a program manager at the hospitality school with a program called Ready for American Hospitality. I work with refugees and migrants, and including the Venezuelan population. I'm also first-generation Congolese American and first-year student at Korbel as well.
Hi, I'm Daniel Perezs, and I'm a professor at the Nobel Institute in the engineering school. And I've been in the country for 25 years, and I'm from Venezuela.
Our wonderful students. Sorry, guys, we put you on the spot.
Hi, I'm Kobe. I'm a first-year graduate student here studying international security. I work with Dr. Schneider on the Latin America Center. I'm studying international security, and I would like to work in Latin America at some point in the future.
My name is Nico, and I'm a first-year master's student studying international security as well.
And I'll mention Zaria Brown outside is helping with registration. She's also one of our wonderful work study students.
And you?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Mandy Loader. I'm the program manager for iCross. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
And you have been incredibly helpful. I'm going to pass you quickly the mic as I'm going to introduce you more in depth. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Elisa Aucancela, and I'm the co-executive director of El Grupo Vida.
I'm Francisco Rodriguez. I'm a professor here at the Korbel School.
And I think we have one more student that just joined you, and we're not putting you on the spot. If you want to quickly say your name and what brought you here, and then we'll go on and start.
I'm Liam Piper. I'm in Dr. Rodriguez's class, and we've been talking about Venezuelan immigration a decent amount, so I just wanted to come and hear more.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and thank you those who have joined us over the internet. We have Dr. García-Pérez on the line, but I am Verónica Figoli, and I am part of the Board of Trustees of the Social Science Foundation, and I'm facilitating this afternoon on behalf of my capacity as a trustee. The Social Science Foundation and Advisory Board to the Korbel School of International Studies supports the Korbel School at the University of Denver, especially by providing advice to the Dean of the Korbel School, supporting fundraising for the school, creating opportunities for faculty, staff, students in global endeavors, and approving funding for our designated endowment for strategic initiatives. The purpose of its many activities and responsibilities is to enhance the quality of the school programs and to train leaders like all of the ones that are here to address global challenges. And in my day job, I raise funds, philanthropic and impact investing funds for Accion Opportunity Fund. We are the nation's lender to small business owners who have been historically disenfranchised from the financial system. I have over 20 years of experience in strategic planning, community, and partnership building. And I'm incredibly passionate and an advocate for social justice and cultural diplomacy. All of this comes from my experience growing up in Venezuela. While living there, I witnessed firsthand the complexity of social challenges which fuel my commitment to driving positive change within my community, whether back in my home country or here in Denver, mi hogar. I am a proud Venezuelan American. I came to the US nearly 25 years ago, finishing my university education to learn English in 1999. And my dream was actually to become a diplomat. Maybe this is the closest that I get to it. I would have loved to study in a school like this. And when I come to the meetings and I hear the passion and I hear the knowledge, I am hopeful. I am hopeful for a world where cultural diplomacy can actually continue to have an impact. I am honored to moderate this panel discussion with the purpose of dismantling myth and rumors about the recent wave of Venezuelan immigration to the United States. I am joined by an esteemed panel of global and local experts on international relations, immigrations, and economics to the US, including its socio-economic impact and the challenges and opportunity it presents. This is a hybrid event, and for those online, please make sure that you're posting your questions on the chat, and one of our wonderful students will pass the question to me. For those in person, I think we're small enough that we can facilitate the questions in person. The only thing that I would ask you is, and when it comes, maybe we can share a mic, is that you use a mic to just make sure that everyone who is online has the same experience or as close as an experience as you have here. So with that, let's start. And what we're going to use a little bit of the Davos model of facilitation. We'll hear from our three panelists. They won't be doing long presentations. We're gonna pass questions and try to make it as fluid as possible. If you wanna hold your questions to the end when I call the questions, that would be great. If you have a burning question, just raise your hand and I'll facilitate it that way. I'm gonna start with Dr. Mónica García-Pérez. Can we put her on the screen for those? Dr. García-Pérez is the Distinguished Professor of Economics at the Fayetteville State University in the Department of Management, Marketing, Entrepreneurship, Fire and Emergency Service Administration at the Broadwell College of Business and Economics. She's also a senior research affiliate at the Cook Center of Social Equity at Duke University and a Roy Wilkins Center, University of Minnesota. She's a health labor economist specializing in research on the role of public policies on social mobility, immigration assimilation, discrimination, and the international effects of barrier to access healthcare and health coverage across race, ethnicity, and nativity. Dr. García-Pérez holds a PhD in economics from the University of Maryland, College Park, and a Master in Science in Economics from the University College of London. She is an invited editor to the American Journal of Health Economics, a special edition on health equity. Her work has been published in Democracy, American Economy Review, BMP, the Journal of Economics Perspective, among others. But what brings Dr. Mónica García-Pérez to my heart is that she's Venezuelan. And when I read this, I get incredibly proud. Dr. García-Pérez, welcome. Anything that I should have said in your introduction that I missed?
No, I'm the professional, but yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So what brought you to the United States?
Well, in some ways similar to you, I came to the US to study, and this is a very interesting question, and this is what is gonna make the conversation about immigration overall more complex, because it's how many times an immigrant come to a specific country. The last time I came to the US and eventually stayed in the US was in 2004 to start my PhD program in economics. And that's over like 20 years ago. So I was for a long time an international student, a Venezuelan that was planning to go back home and apply her skill back in Venezuela. And things happen, life happened, things happen in Venezuela, and life happened in my own life. And now I citizen of the United States and a Venezuelan immigrant too.
Thank you so much. So data shows that by the end of 2023, there were more than 7 million Venezuelan refugees and migrants globally, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency. The agency calls it the largest forced displacement crisis ever in Latin America. Last year, more than 300,000 Venezuelans crossed the Darien Gap, and I think everyone knows what the Darien Gap is, which is between Colombia and Panama, and has become a common route for migrants to come to the United States. There is nothing common about that route if you have read about it. So on that, what does the economics research say about the impact of immigration in receiving countries?
Yeah. Well, a way to summarize the literature on immigration, there are different ways that we can aggregate the literature. One is to think about the literature as the general effect on nationwide versus local geography. The literature between the short run and the long run effect, and then the literature of skills. What are the skills that immigrants bring to the country versus the skills that native born, specifically in the US, have, or does the receiving country have? And this is what brings up a lot of confusion in the discussion about immigration sometimes, especially among economists, or what economists find, the result that economists find in the literature. In the short run, there is sometimes trade-off between what immigrants are bringing in terms of skills to local areas, or even to national areas, overall geographic area, bigger geographic areas, because immigrants may in some way complement the population that already exists in terms of skills, or may substitute. And some of the political rhetoric issues is about that substitute. Like immigrants are taking our jobs is what comes in the political arena. But in economics, we just call it substitute. And what it happens then is that in the long run, the consensus has been that immigrants also generate new jobs. Examples of that is, and this is on the low skill of immigrants that end up becoming babysitters or nannies, and we see an improvement in the female labor participation of women in those areas, or in those during those period of time. So there is those substitution and complementarity that plays a role, mostly the substitution first role in the short run, and the complementarity or the adjustment in the economy in the medium or long run. Then there is a tendency of immigrants concentrated in local areas because of information. They generally tend to go to typical areas where previous wave of immigrants have settled before. But all this literature, especially in economics, has been concentrated on economic migrants. And when we call economic migrants, we tend to assume economic migrants make decisions on whether migrate or not in some part of push versus pull events that make them leave the country versus events that make the receiving country more attractive. However, the Venezuelan migration, it's a hybrid model of an economic migrant versus what would be forced migration. In the recent literature, more people are trying to understand what forced migration is and how the decision process and the effect of forced migration is to the economy, because the difference between economic migrants and forced migrants is the distribution of skills. Again, in economics, we care about that part of human capital, we call it, and how they are going to add value to the economy through most likely the labor market or the creation of firms and entrepreneurship. So for forced migration, there is likely to be a more a bigger distribution of skills, and actually most of the literature on forced migration have found a positive impact even in the short run, because most of the time forced migrants that are more likely to emigrate or mobilize tend to have higher skills, higher earnings, and means to be able to move around to other countries. So that's this in summary. The Venezuelan migration will have a mix, and part of the literature and part of the difficulty among the economists to analyze the Venezuelan migration is because the mix between an economic migrant that has the decision of migrating versus the forced migration, which is the migrant who's being forced to migrate despite their wishes. So that's our different things. Overall, even with thinking about forced migration or economic migrants, what is a consensus in the economic literature is that as a net, they are negative cost, they are cost, but a benefit as a net, migrants bring a net positive to the economy. In the US, the Congress Budget Office estimated those into 2023, and several, even the Cato organization replicated the results for the National Academic of Science with a group of economists and replicated what are the net benefits of migration. So at the aggregate, migration will benefit any economy. Specifically in the US, it has benefited the economy of the US.
Thank you. I think you have some slides. Do you want to make reference to any of those? I just want to make sure if you want, we can make that available.
Yeah, you can make that available. It depends on the question. So, and I will bring, if there's an open, I will bring some
You
of
let me
those.
know.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I just wanted to do that. Well, now I'm going to pass it on to Francisco. I'm sorry, Professor Rodriguez, a Venezuelan economist with decades of experience in public service, academia, and private sector. He graduated with a PhD in economics from Harvard University in 1998. Prior to joining Korbel, he taught economics and public policy at the University of Maryland, Wesleyan University, and the University of Notre Dame. Rodriguez has held prominent positions in the public and private sector, including head of the Economic and Financial Advisory to the Venezuelan National Assembly, head of the research team of the United Nations Human Development Report Office, and chief Andean economist of Bank of America. He has been a visiting research at the International Monetary Fund and a fellow of the Council on Foreign Relations. Professor Rodriguez's research focuses on understanding the relationship between political conflict and economic performance, and he's soon to release a book titled My Scorched Earth, The Political Economy of Venezuelan's Collapse. And this will be published in 2024, and we'll do a party for that. And a book reveal, right? Like I asked Dr. García-Pérez, please tell us about your journey. What brought you to Denver? What brought you to the United States?
Well, thank you very much, Verónica, for that introduction. It's a pleasure being here and having this opportunity to talk about the effects of Venezuelan immigration into the U.S. And I feel that I have a response to which, to a certain extent, is similar to Mónica's, which is that I think that, at least at some moment of my life, I was what the literature characterizes as circular migration, which is that came to the US, then went back, then came to the US, then went back. So I did that at least 2 or 3 times. I came here as a child because of my parents' work. Then we went back to Venezuela. I did my undergraduate in Venezuela. I did my doctorate in the US. Then I went back to Venezuela to work, and then I came to the US. But last time that I came to the US was in 2005, so almost 20 years ago. But there's almost a sense in which, at least I personally feel, that I never left. And I feel that I never left because like I spent like most of my time, like 80–90% of my, at least of my professional time, thinking about Venezuela, writing about Venezuela. Most of my papers are about Venezuela. I have a book. By the way, the publisher changed the title, so now it's called, yes, no, it's called, well, it was not My Scorched Earth, it was Scorched Earth, but now it's called, actually, The Collapse of Venezuela, Scorched Earth Politics and Economic Decline. And it essentially tries to answer a question which I think is at the center of what we're going to be discussing here today, which is, why did the Venezuelan economy collapse? So since I spent all of my time thinking about Venezuela, writing about Venezuela, my WhatsApp groups are all about Venezuela with people who are in Venezuela and who are outside of Venezuela. I'm not sure that like this, I don't feel outside. I mean, I feel that I'm in the US, but I don't really feel outside of Venezuela.
So on that, for people here, right? What are the roots of the Venezuelan migration crisis? Why have so many Venezuelans left the country? And let's think about those who, and that what Dr. Garcia talked about, that forced migration, right? And why have they begun to enter the U.S. at the numbers they have in recent years, and at the expense of their own life in recent years?
Okay, well, that is, I think, a very important question. And Mónica Garcia made an important distinction, which is a distinction that's very much used in the literature between kind of economic migration and forced migration. And I think that Venezuela forces us in many ways to rethink categories. And I think that maybe here we also have to rethink them, because I would argue that this is both forced and economic, or that probably this is something that we could call economically forced migration. And I wanted to show you a first picture, a first slide, just so that you get the dimensions of what's happened in Venezuela over the course of the last decade. And this slide, which you'll see in a minute, is going to show you the magnitude of Venezuela's collapse. No, keep going. Those are Mónica's slides. Yeah, this one. Okay. So this is Venezuelan per capita GDP from 1880 to 2023. And the shaded area is what happened between 2012 and 2020. This is the Venezuelan economic collapse. This collapse was a decline of 71.5% in per capita GDP. Now, to get an idea of how big that is, think about the Great Depression in the US, then think about another Great Depression, then think about another Great Depression. This is the magnitude of 3 Great Depressions. This is the largest peacetime economic collapse documented since 1950, which is the moment from which we have pretty much comparable data for the majority of countries in the world. And in my research, I've actually used data constructed by other researchers to estimate GDP going back to year one, that is to the beginnings of the Common Era. And Venezuela's is the largest peacetime economic collapse in the Common Era. So there have been larger collapses, but all of those have been associated with wars. In Venezuela, there's been no armed conflict. I mean, there's been no armies fighting over control. And this is important because when there are armies that are essentially throwing bombs on each other and throwing bombs on cities, well, then capital, like factories, get destroyed. And then you understand why the economy is collapsing. That didn't happen in Venezuela, yet it had this huge economic collapse. So I would argue that this phenomenon is both economic and it's forced. I mean, it's forced by the magnitude of the effect. So if you're, and by the way, this is per capita GDP. There are measures of wage rates, of real wage rates, that have fallen by more than 99%. So imagine, I mean, your wage has been completely obliterated. So you have to leave. There's that's the element of it being forced, I think, is that opportunities just simply disappeared. There was no way to continue doing what you were doing in Venezuela, and that's why you have to look for something elsewhere. But at the same time, it's economic because I would argue that the main reason why people have left was the economy. And I'm not trying to underestimate the relevance of the very serious human rights violations, crimes against humanity that have been committed in Venezuela. But the reality is that when we see forced displacements which are generated by political violence, usually it's another type of political violence, it's genocide, it's mass killings, events that we have not seen in Venezuela and that are not documented in Venezuela. What is documented is a collapse in opportunities. So that, I think, is the first lesson that it's important to understand. It's a country whose economy collapsed, and therefore this trend is only going to reverse if fundamental economic change happens in Venezuela. And of course, there's a lot of political and economic conditions for that to happen, which we can discuss. The magnitude of the displacement is huge, 7.7 million persons, according to most recent estimates from the UN. That upsurge really began around 2016, 2017, pretty much the moment at which that crisis goes from being a large crisis to being a huge crisis. That's the moment in which people really start to leave en masse. In the US, there are, according to the last estimates, which are from 2021, there were around 640,000 persons. There is, I would say that that number is probably underestimates the current level. So we're probably around 1 million Venezuelans. That's still less than 2% of all foreign-born persons in the US. And it's still proportionately less than those who come from other regions in Latin America. I mean, to give you an example, Venezuela has 3 times the population of Cuba, but there are twice as many Cubans in the US than Venezuelans. So it's still a population that, particularly given the magnitude of the crisis, is underrepresented. So the other point that I wanted to make, and I wanted to show the next slide, is that there's been this politicized narrative about crime, Venezuelan migrants bringing crime. And we know that Denver and Aurora, in particular, which is a city where I live, has been at the center of U.S. political debates. And this narrative has been seized on by a political party and by a candidate, essentially trying to tell a story that crime is out of control in Aurora, and that this is because of Venezuelan gangs. Now, there have been incidents, I mean, definitely there are incidents that are documented, as you would expect with any large movement of persons. But the one thing that is clearly and demonstrably false is you cannot say that Venezuelans have caused the crime wave in Aurora because there is no crime wave in Aurora. And what I'm showing you here are statistics from the Aurora Police Department about different types of crime incidents. So the first one is crimes reported in Aurora, 2019 to 2024. You see that they peaked in 2022. By the way, the 2024 numbers are not complete, but I adjusted them to annual so that they're annual equivalents. So it's not low because the year has not come to an end. These are equivalents from what we've seen so far to what you would have in a year. So the upsurge of Venezuelan migrants actually into Aurora occurs in 2023 and 2024. And actually you see a decline in crimes. You see a decline in murders, which are the most extreme violent crimes. You see a decline in robberies. And all of this talk about the Tren de Aragua, like everybody knows now what the Tren de Aragua is in the US, although apparently, according to the Aurora police, they've only documented 10 members of the Tren de Aragua, of which 4 are in jail. But if you look at gang-related incidents, also, there's no upward trend. I mean, that's pretty much stable, and it's much lower now than it was at its peak in 2019. There is a study that was recently published in World Development, which is one of the leading development journals, looking at the effects of Venezuelan immigration on crime in Peru. And it actually found that the places that receive most Venezuelan migrants actually have less crime rates. And they apply what's known as an instrumental variables methodology to take into account causal effects, and they effectively reach the conclusion that Venezuelan migration actually causes a decline in crime rates when looking at localities in Peru. So the point is that all of these narratives have been seized on politically, but when you look at the data tells a very different story. The data tells a story that's consistent with the findings that Dr. Garcia so brilliantly sketched about the effects of migration in the recipient communities, and which is that overall the effect is positive because, yes, of course, migrants compete for jobs, but they also earn money, and they also spend that money, and that money creates more jobs. And this is something that is quite well known and well identified in the literature, and the evidence is again consistent with the view that there is no tendency or no effect of immigration to cause increases in crime rates. So what we're really looking at here is some narratives that have been politicized, and I think it's important to come to grips with that.
Thank you, Professor Rodriguez. Now I'm going to turn to Elisa Aucancela, and it's because you're on the ground. You are working with these so-called criminals, right? And I'm not abusing this based on what media is telling us. But before that, I want to introduce you. You're the executive director of Grupo Vida. Elisa is originally from Puerto Rico, la Isla del Encanto. I have had the opportunity to work on that island, and it's incredible. I have had the opportunity to be friends and be colleagues from people from Puerto Rico, and we are fortunate that they're American citizens. She's an experienced bilingual, Spanish-English professional with expertise in education and advocacy. Her work has focused on diverse populations, leadership, and standardized testing, parent involvement. She has held roles in academic and nonprofit settings. Her education background includes a master's in special education, clinical psychology, and a PhD studies in infant and early childhood development. She actively participates in advisory boards such as the Colorado Infant Mental Health Association, the STAR Institute, and the Center at UNC. Her expertise lies in social, emotional, and developmental evaluations, differentiated instructions, and running a grassroots nonprofit led by immigrants. The mission of Grupo Vida is to empower immigrants with disabilities and their families with information, training, and direct advocacy to help them become more self-sufficient and give our community a voice, raising awareness about their rights. Elisa, what brought you to Denver, and what brings you to this work? I see that, and I'm going to continue with a question. I see that your organization, actually, in your mission, said that you support immigrants with disabilities. Can you tell me more about how you were brought up to the work of supporting the recent wave of immigration? What are the biggest challenges Venezuelans are facing on the ground when coming to Denver? And I want to add that Denver city officials say that more than 40,000 migrants arrive in Denver in less than 2 years, describing it as the highest number of new arrivals per capita of any city in the United States.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Why I came to Denver? Opportunities for work. They brought me here. And I was not looking for coming to Denver. I went to an opportunity. I was curious to check this group of people that they were trying to, to talk about jobs in different states for teachers. And then I saw that Denver was in a corner without a lot of students. And my curiosity was like, okay, tell me more about it. And it seems that this amazing former supervisor, I don't know, kind of was like, I want you. And she called me one time per week, say like, hey, this is amazing. Come here, you will love it. And I remember that I said like, the job is so bad. It's so like, I don't think that, because they cannot find anybody in Denver. What is going on in Denver? And then I learned that Denver Public Schools, and still they provide Spanish in the first, like from preschool to third grade, and they needed, and they still need a lot of special educator teachers, bilingual, that at that moment was so limited. And again, I feel that the pattern is kind of the opportunity. And why I'm working with newcomers and why at Grupo Vida is, and it happened 2 years ago. 2 years ago when a lot of things started to happening and we needed to speak out for the families who have children, young and adults with disabilities. And not just only talking with them about their rights, but also remembering the city, specifically Denver, about the American Disability Act. Like, you need to provide this support in the shelter. And of course, at that moment was an emergency. Nobody was asking or talking or kind of thinking about the need of different accessibility at that time. And we were kind of, at that moment, advocating. That moment, we start to know more about the families who came, and not just only that, their stories. I know, and it's amazing when we have a lot of research, but what about when you talk with the people and you know their stories and the why? And something that I learned is most of them, they were not in adventure of coming to a new country and let's see what happened. Woohoo, yeah. No, it was not like that. Was I need to go because I cannot continue live here, because my child is going to die because I cannot find a medication that they need. I need to go because I don't feel safe for my child with a disability. Therefore, they decided to go to an amazing journey to come to Texas. They didn't know about Denver, most of them at the beginning. They were sent to us. And at that moment, the city of Denver had incredible programs that I can tell you at this moment that most of these programs are going to be end or closed. Therefore, newcomers or new people who are coming, they're not going to find the same support that they had 2 years ago. And we're still advocating for that. We're still advocating for shelters. We're still advocating for support. But one of the things that I want to bring in your attention, well, two things. One is most of these families, of the families that I had the opportunity to interview, they have amazing skills, but they cannot use it. But there are opportunity to use it, but they can't for different things, because they are requesting asylum and they're just waiting for work permit or for different situations that they are. And I'm like, imagine if we can use all these amazing skills that they have. The second is, most of them are coming with debt. And I don't think that we are talking about that. They didn't have the money, but they found the money. Therefore, they need to pay back. If not, something can happen for their families in their country. In Venezuela, also we have been working with other, but most of family who are coming from Venezuela. In that case, it's something deeper, that they need to work because they need to pay. And you know how difficult can be paid with huge interest. In that case, they are not coming in zero. They are coming in negative to start a new life. The thing that I observe is when the family have the tools to work, to use their skills, and to connect with the community, they can success. And this is what I have been seeing in some of the families that we had the opportunity to advocate for support for these families, and they're stable. They can they know how to go to the school. They know how to connect. They can advocate for themselves. Challenge a lot. Language, understanding this system. Why I cannot let an apartment like that. How is going to impact that? What happened? Like, there are different things that they are not used to, and they need to learn. When I came here, I needed to learn. I'm still learning. In that cases, they are facing a lot of struggle, but one of my wondering is, what things, if we have the tools, if we have the, not just only the tool, but everything that we provide for refugees, that again is maybe another topic, to asylum seekers, I think things can be different.
Thank you. We're 20 minutes away from our time, but I want to segue, and I want to ask, if you're starting to have questions, let me know, raise your hand. I don't know if there are questions from online, but Dr. García-Pérez, I think Elisa brought a very interesting topic. When families are given supports, they integrate faster, and faster also create economic activity. In your opinion and your research, what are the countries in the world that, without being perfect, we know what, all right, are more welcoming, have more welcoming immigrant policies? And do you see any correlation to GDP?
In general, for any migrant groups, not just Venezuelans, more than welcoming in terms of immigrant policies, more organized or more strategic immigrant policies or immigration policies will be Australia and Canada. They tend to be examples of systems in which they try to understand what are their needs and create systems in an organized way that provide an immigration status that is thinking in the long run, not just in the needs of even the migrants, but more on the needs of the country. So that creates sometimes bigger opportunities and more strategic decisions from migrants. Obviously, these are countries, especially Australia, farther away, but Australia had several migrants from the east side of the world, and Canada has more migrants from the western side of the world. This is in general, but specifically with Venezuelan, there has been several differences in how welcoming or how relaxed immigration policies have been in the continent, especially in South America, with Colombia being one of the potentially more generous, if we can say, given the long history of the two countries. And countries like Peru and Chile, more of the restricted, Chile with some more leverage than Peru in terms of policies, changing policies to restrict and make it harder for migrants, specifically Venezuelan migrants, to assimilate or to find jobs or even mobilize internally in their countries. Most of the time, easier assimilation is related to access to jobs, related to access to services that are in place for the migrants themselves or for the family members. So there is this also intergenerational benefit in terms of children being educated in the receiving country, or other family members providing other services in the receiving country. Then again, this is very important, also separating economic migrants to forced migration, because economic migrants are more likely to migrate alone, individually, while forced migrants are more likely to migrate in group of family. So for forced migration, but that's why again come into the mix between Venezuelan migrants, in which some are migrating. Especially, this is very important also for migration overall in Venezuela. Before 2000, Venezuelan was no a group of citizens that were migrating. After 2000, especially after 2010, we start seeing Venezuelans migrating to different parts of the world. There is, in the US, there is an early migration before 2016, and we see how welcoming most of the countries, including the US, were to overall entrance of Venezuela. And maybe not for the reason of migrants, especially the US identify officially a migrant, someone who is finally deciding to reside in the US, not someone who holds a visa. That's a no-migrant visa. That's what the official title is. But before 2016, most of the policies in terms of visa applications were a little bit more the typical application for Venezuela countries, like they didn't have many migrants in the U.S. Then 2017 hits, and then there is what Dr. Rodriguez was mentioning about the economic collapse and this force that is mixed also with the political pressure, and migrants are coming in different flavors. Venezuelan migrants are coming from different type of groups, socioeconomic groups, and now comes with different socioeconomic groups come the clash that happens when you see individuals that may not come with perfect English, or may not come with well, this is very interesting, even though the skills distribution is part of the normal definition of the distribution of migrants that could create benefit to a potential country. Venezuelans are more likely to have a high school degree, more likely to have some college, even when they're coming from lower socioeconomic status. So that's a very interesting characteristic of the economic Venezuelan migrants overall. Even when they're coming from low economic status from Venezuela. And then it comes the most recent migration that comes after COVID, in which we're seeing now a policy that is overall responding in early 2020, and definitely 2018, 19, but early 2020, responding to a migration overall. And creating the situation in Venezuela is getting worse, and creating policies in which start trying to respond in a faster way to the situation of Venezuelans arriving to the U.S. Because again, Venezuelans are arriving to the U.S. Through asylum, applying to asylum in a system that is collapsing for purposes that I don't have the description for that, but the immigration system is being underfunded during the same period that Venezuelans are applying for the process that it's supposed to be applying to them. And then we in 2021 have the temporary protected status that didn't exist before for Venezuelans. And I'm saying all these stories because during that period, policies are responding in the US, policies are responding more to the wave of migrants, Venezuelan migrants that are arriving, writing that shaping the migration, and that make it very hard for economic research to talk about Venezuelans. There are certain points that are very new, and that's why the research, the academic research on the Venezuelan migration, it's very is not existent. It's in terms of economics, the thinking about really what is shaping and how the Venezuelans are shaping the economies. It's kind of the chicken and the egg issue at this point, still, because most of the policies are very, very recent. We're talking about 2023, starting the sponsor programs, and before that was the TPS, and we're talking just about numbers of 2024, even in Denver, around 37,000 cases that are in immigration court in backlog. And then we're seeing migrant Venezuelan migrants in states that we wouldn't expect, like Ohio, Utah, and Michigan, and New Mexico maybe, but it's very slow. But Ohio, Utah, and Michigan are not the typical migrant hub or magnet. But this is because of internal political measures that literally draw people to those areas. So there are cases in which probably the literature will come out later, in which we get later, we think like it's happening right now, but it's not published and working paper, in which we've seen how Venezuelans have been literally dropped in a city that generally has no receiving migrants, as it's not prepared. It doesn't have an institutional setting for receiving the large amount of migrants. And that's probably what we see in Denver.
Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia-Pérez. Any questions from the audience? Please. Do you mind? I just want to make sure people online can.
Thank you for the amazing presentation. My question was directed to Dr. Elisa. I know you mentioned if it was possible for the asylum seekers to be able to have access to programs the same way as refugees, but knowing that the refugee resettlement programs are also very, very limited and experiencing a lot of issues as far as those said programs, especially when it comes to ESL and housing funding and things like that, how do you see that being possible for the refugee migrants, especially with the numbers that we've seen in the past couple of years, and how effective can that be?
Definitely, we need more funding. The thing that I observe is the way that they are treated. Because they are waiting, they are asylum seekers, they need to wait for some time, we don't know how long, to really have what they need, compared with the refugee that you come with all your documents. And then yes, they are a very unique process for refugee, where the funding have, and please tell me if this is wrong or if it has been changed, but a percent from private funding and a percent from the, the state. In that case, and they're supposed to, in 1 year, to kind of say like, yes, we provide this support, now you are ready to. In the case for asylum seekers, we don't have that. We don't have that year of support. We have maybe few months in a shelter, and again, now it's less shelter at this moment. Currently, the shelters are kind of running by non-profit, and they are completely like a long waiting list. In that case, if you don't provide the tools to be success and thrive, it's going to be really difficult for them to feel that this is a new place, this is home now. They are trying to survive instead of thrive. In that case, how do we change? I know refugee, I don't want the information that I provide, I don't want that feel like, wow, yes, all the programs are completely, because it's not. But if I compare with what the city, the state is providing for asylum seekers, it's really a small support.
Thank you. So because we're at limited time, I want to ask both questions to be short, and also I'm going to ask from our panelists to be, anybody else wants to add anything on that? No? Okay. I have a question from a question online that I want to make sure Dr. Rodriguez can answer. It says, how can you not mention the U.S. cruel policy of economic sanctions driving migration?
I have actually written several papers, and a large part of my book, which is, as I mentioned, about to be published, The Collapse of Venezuela, deals in particular with the effect of sanctions on the Venezuelan economy. So when you look at this huge collapse, and as I said, the discussion about the causes of the collapse is complex because as many social processes, there are multiple causes that impact on it. So definitely when the Venezuelan economy peaked and started declining, what you saw in that graph, the first part of it is definitely not related to sanctions for a very simple reason, which is that sanctions were imposed in 2017. And the Venezuelan economy had already declined significantly between 2012 and 2017. However, why did the Venezuelan economy decline from 2012 to 2017? Well, this was the typical Latin American large economic crisis. It's comparable to a certain extent to the crisis that Venezuela had had in the 1980s, or the crisis that, say, a country like Peru had had during the government of Garcia. It was what economists call the unraveling of the macroeconomics of populism. The country had suffered from a terms of trade boom, very high oil prices during the time that Chavez was in government. Chavez's administration spent a lot of that money. It spent all of that money, and then it spent what it didn't have. So it borrowed, so it accumulated very high levels of debt. So after Chavez died, oil prices started going down. The economy didn't have any savings. So therefore, you had a massive economic adjustment, which was also very poorly managed by the Maduro government. So that's part one. The puzzle about this is the following. Latin America has seen many of these crises before. And typically, they end in a collapse of 20, 30% of GDP, but not 71% of GDP. So there's something else that happened in Venezuela. And what's interesting is that what you see starting in 2017 is oil production start to collapse. And when you see, and in the collapse of oil production, and I've written several papers on that, sanctions do play a very important role because in 2017, the US government imposed sanctions that impeded the state-owned oil company from refinancing its debt. So take any major oil company in the world, you tell it you can't borrow, you can't refinance your debt, and then 2 years later, the US government recognized an opposition leader as president of Venezuela, which meant that the state-owned oil company also didn't have access to its US bank accounts. It couldn't sell oil in the US. And then the US said, if you want to sell oil in Europe or in India, we're not going to let you do that either because we're going to sanction or threaten to sanction the European and Indian firms that want to buy oil from you. So in the end, when I've published some of these estimates, roughly half of that collapse of 71%, I attribute to forces that are associated to sanctions or to the political strategies, the foreign policies that were adopted with the political aim of having an effect on the Venezuelan situation and of making things more difficult on the Maduro government. So yes, bottom line, sanctions did play an important role, but they are far from the only answer to why Venezuelan growth collapsed.
Thank you. Anyone else who, Dr. Garcia-Pérez, you want to add anything to that? Elisa?
No, that was complete. Thank you.
Okay. We're right at time, but if people are okay, we can let one more question. Okay. But you're going to make me promise it's going to be a short question. It's going to be a short answer.
I try. So for Dr. Rodriguez, thank you for your presentation. And I'm really happy to see the data that you showed from the police department, showing the decline actually in the last year in crime. So the question is, what would you attribute the bad propaganda that we have heard lately, and what could be done to change the image? Because I personally have seen the negative impact of that.
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, to me, it's not surprising to see this narrative. I mean, we see this narrative arise in many countries. The anti-immigrant narrative is essentially a fundamental part of populist discourse, and populist discourse kind of distorts realities. It creates enemies. I mean, creating enemies kind of mobilizes some sectors of the population. And I think that part of the deeper question that we want to ask is, not why there are populist leaders who want to spin these false narratives, but why is it that these false narratives at sometimes have a greater hold on sectors of the population? And I think that there we really have to start talking about kind of other issues which we would definitely need one more event, if not several events, to talk about, such as the increase in income inequality and polarization in the US itself. I mean, what happens is that when countries, let me put it this way. The US right now has the same Gini coefficient of Peru. So the US, in terms of income distribution, has become a Latin American nation. So I am not surprised to see that it has Latin American politics. So when you have so much inequality, so much polarization, then there are going to be opportunistic political leaders that are going to say, oh, you're not doing well, you're doing poorly because of the immigrants, even though the literature shows that that's not the reality. So how do we counter this? Well, I think that from our standpoint as academics, we have to talk about the evidence, we have to show the evidence. I mean, I must say something. I am actually surprised that I had to come up with that graph that I showed you. I built that graph essentially downloading the data from the Aurora Police Department. I mean, come on. This has been an issue that has been in presidential debates watched by millions of people. So this counter argument should have been out there weeks, if not months ago.
Okay, well, I think we would have more time for more questions, but we want to be respectful of your time and also our panelists. Thank you, Dr. García-Pérez, joining us remotely. Thank you, everyone. And there's going to be a follow-up conversation later in January about more on the political implications and economic implications of in Venezuela, but it will be a follow-up conversation. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining us.